Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mateo Chavez Lewis, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going full YouTuber mode, and we're doing a tier list. The theater community was shaken a few months ago by the passing of Stephen Sondheim. Stephen was a legend to anybody who loves musical theater. The characters he wrote were always so complex and messy, and he communicated so much more in music than anybody ever knew one could. Plus, his lyrics are also just really clever. He paved the way for writers like Lin-Manuel Miranda to use such dense rhyming and wordplay in their lyrics. And over his career, he penned a zillion musicals, but today I'm going to focus on just some of his most well-known. So if you don't know what a tier list is, this is a trend that I've been seeing a lot on YouTube recently, where YouTubers will take a bunch of things. So we're going to do Sondheim musicals, and then they rank them A, B, C, D tier, and then the highest tier, the star tier, is the S tier. And I think it comes from video games, but I'm not much of a gamer, so I couldn't tell you that for sure. But we're gonna do it with Sondheim musicals, and I'm really excited. I think it's gonna be really fun. So let's dive in. So here's our screen where we're going to be sorting all of these musicals. As you can see, we've got, S, A, B, C, and then this is the F tier, so these are the ones who really suck. I don't imagine we'll get a lot of F tier musicals from Stephen Sondheim. I also changed this because it's supposed to be C tier, but I changed it to B- because Sondheim doesn't do worse than B. So here's our tier list. We've got S tier, which is the highest. This is the best musicals, the ones that really changed my life. These are the A tiers. These are the objectively brilliant, really, really good ones that didn't quite change my life, but they are very, very important to me, and I think they're brilliant works of art. The B tier is okay, he tried his best. And then the B- tier is oof, Sondheim, buddy, you gotta get your stuff together. And then F tier, Sondheim didn't write any F material, so we can just go ahead and get rid of that. Let's get started. So we've got over here, this is the first musical we've got. This is A Little Night Music. I think it's in alphabetical order. Yeah. So we've got A Little Night Music. The whole gimmick with A Little Night Music is that he wrote the whole score in 3/4 time or in 6/8 time, something that has a waltz feel to it. So a waltz is the rhythmic feel of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Anything that has this kind of a feel. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so Sondheim wrote the entire musical in that rhythmic meter, which is a cool gimmick, and he had a reason for it, it represents the feeling of love, or the way that love is a waltz or something, I don't know, or the way that the night can carry you away with love, or something. And I think it's cool that he managed to do it, but it gets a little bit tiring to listen to for me, personally. I feel like when I listen to the whole score of A Little Night Music front to back, it lulls me to sleep a little bit, which I feel like a musical shouldn't do, because a musical is trying to get you to pay attention to the story. It's not it's not just about the music. It's not just about the feeling, the sensation that it evokes. It's about telling the story. This kind of waltz, especially if it's a slower waltz. It'll put you to sleep. So I'm gonna go ahead and put A Little Night Music in the B tier. Unfortunately, we're starting off with one that isn't really my favorite. Moving on, Anyone Can Whistle. This is one of his lesser known ones, but there's a great recording of it on Apple Music, Spotify, so you can listen to all the songs, and there's some really clever tunes in this one. Anyone Can Whistle is the title song, is one of the most beautiful songs Sondheim ever wrote, in my opinion, and Everybody Says Don't is a song that I really relate to. Everybody says don't walk on the grass, don't step out of line, but I say don't be afraid. That's wordplay and a deep message. That's the best of both worlds. So Anyone Can Whistle, you're going right into the A tier, my friend. Moving on, so this is Assassins. Sondheim famously has said that this is the only show he's ever written that he doesn't think there's anything wrong with. He's this is the one show that I don't see how I could improve. And he does a really good job of humanizing people who have done things like murder and assassination, which is very difficult to do, but not if you're Sondheim, the greatest genius of all time in musical theater. So Assassins is also going to go in the A tier for me. Bounce, later entitled Roadshow, was one of the last, or I think the last full show that Sondheim ever wrote. There's some great tunes in it, but I think it's going to go B tier. I don't know it very well, but the songs I do know from it, there are a few really good ones, but for the most part, it's a little bit drier than some of Sondheim's other stuff. And if we're comparing it to, a score by any other musical theater composer, it would probably end up in the S tier, but... Company is next. Okay. Company, I love this show. There's something so humongous about the themes that it states about love and marriage and partnership, and it does so in a really honest way. It talks about love in a way that isn't fairy tale. It doesn't talk about happily ever after. It talks about love in a very realistic way. Plus, this is one of my favorite pieces of music ever written. This one bar chunk from Being Alive. There's something so beautiful about that to me. It's just the feeling of falling in love. And it's also the feeling of wanting to be loved. And he does that with the simplest of chords. It's this A major over B, which is the fourth over the fifth, which is a very common chord to hear in musical theater because it leads you really nicely back to the tonic chord. Like that. But then he just shifts in this A major chord. A and E are both next to the semitones in the major scale. So you know how the major scale has two semitones in it? It goes full tone, semitone, full tone, semitone. And that's how the major scale is constructed. So in this A major chord, we've got the A, which is right next to the G sharp in the E major scale. And we've also got this note E, which is right next to the D sharp in the E major scale. So this chord is very consonant and classic to hear in the E major scale. You hear that all the time. But then what he does is he just shifts each one of them a semitone. The tiniest little change, and it makes it so beautiful. Somebody crown me with love, etc. An amazing, amazing masterpiece. Possibly the greatest musical ever written. Possibly the greatest piece of theater ever written. Possibly the greatest score of music ever written, in my opinion. Just one of the greatest things that humanity has ever created is this musical company. And this is going right up here in the S tier. Alright, Do I Hear a Waltz? So after Oscar Hammerstein, who famously collaborated with Richard Rodgers, died, Hammerstein mentored Sondheim a lot in Sondheim's youth. And when Hammerstein was on his deathbed, he said, Steve, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to write a musical with Richard Rodgers. And Steve was like, Oscar, come on, dude. I don't write lyrics only anymore. I did that in West Side Story and Gypsy, and I was like, I've had enough. I'm going to write the music to my own lyrics from now on. And Oscar said, buddy, I'm dying. I'm the greatest book writer and lyricist of all time in the musical theater. I've given you the tools to learn everything you've learned, and I've given you the training to become Stephen Sondheim. The least you can do is fulfill this one dying wish for me. Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy. And Steve said, I guess. And he wrote Do I Hear a Waltz? And it sounds like, this show, in my opinion, feels like you can tell that Stephen Sondheim is doing it because he feels like he has to, and not because he's inspired to do it or he's moved by the story. And he talks a lot about this in his writings and in interviews about this experience. Nothing against Richard Rodgers, but this is a B- one for me. Not Sondheim's greatest work of all time. Then we've got Follies. I was really lucky to see a live in-concert production of Follies at Kerner Hall in Toronto this past October. And it was actually the first time I've gotten to see Follies on a stage, because it's not often produced, which is weird because I want to say it's not very difficult to produce, although that's probably not true because you have to get all the showgirl costumes and all of that. So maybe it is expensive to produce, but it's so good. It's so great. And it does a really good job of showing us the difference between who we want to be when we grow up and then who we become, which is a theme that Sondheim played with a lot because he played with it in Follies and also most notably in Merrily We Roll Along. I'm Still Here is one of my favorite Sondheim songs. The Road You Didn't Take is actually one of my favorite Sondheim songs as well. And of course, Losing My Mind, which is one of his most famous songs of all time, comes from this show. This is going to be definitely an A tier show. Next, we have a funny thing happen on the way to the Forum, which I think is so great. I saw this show. It was one of the first shows I ever saw. I saw it at the Stratford Festival in Canada, and it was drop dead funny. So good, so funny, like just pure comedy, not making fun of anyone or anything. It doesn't feel like there's any particular group of people who's the butt of all the jokes. There's some misogynistic humor in it, but I feel like the tone of it to me reads more like he's making fun of the men who believe these things rather than making fun of women or saying that this is an okay opinion to have. Like in the song Everybody Ought to Have a Maid. But I think that if you look at comedy in the 1960s, which is when this was written, you will find a lot more horrible, offensive things in that time period than Forum. Forum is I think, just like pure comedy, just funny. Doesn't need to be that crude or that crass in order to be funny. Doesn't need to make fun of anyone or pull cheap punches, you know. It's just it's just streamlined comedy. Little things like sing it, spell it, F-R-E-E, no, the long way. That is such a good joke, and it doesn't make fun of anyone or anything. It's just funny. So that's what Forum does really well. So that's why that's going in the A tier for me as well. Frogs? I don't know the Frogs very well. I've only heard like one song from it. Apparently it was produced in a swimming pool, which is kind of cool, but I don't know it well enough to gauge. So I'm going to put this in a question mark box for shows that I don't know. Gypsy. This is a great show. Sondheim only wrote the lyrics. He didn't write the music. It was one of the 2 first Broadway shows he did. This was his second Broadway show, and he wrote the lyrics, and Julie Stein wrote the music. Julie Stein of Let It Snow fame. Great show, really complex subject material. So it's about, you know, the stage mom who pressures her daughters to go into the theater and lives vicariously through them. And it kind of gets into her psychology and it paints this portrait of this really kind of messed up, complex, ugly person in a very beautiful way. Yeah, so this is also an A tier one for me. Then we've got Into the Woods. What can I say about Into the Woods? Like, that's just one of the greatest things ever written. Listen to that. It sounds so... It's a combination of the marching feeling of going into the woods, but also this major 7th chord here. It could have just been a major chord, right? It could have just been... And that's interesting, but with that major 7... Oh, so good. Because that major 7 just makes it so dreamy and it takes you to that fairy tale land right away. Into the Woods also is one of these musicals that is about life. It's about everything. Every lesson that you could possibly learn growing up, you can find that lesson in this fairy tale of Into the Woods. It's a life instruction manual, you know? How to learn, how to grow, how to appreciate the moments in your life, how to move on when people leave you halfway through the wood, and most importantly, in my opinion, nice is different than good. So many fantastic things in this show. It has this really innovative and original twist where the second half of the musical is like an epilogue to the first half. The first half ends happily ever after, like a fairy tale, but then the second half of the musical, all hell breaks loose, and it's like real life, and it kind of pokes fun at the way that fairy tales wrap everything up with a bow, and it makes fun of life in the sense that life doesn't have happily ever afters. Happily ever after is about where you stop the story, but then the next chapter might be, you know, a giant comes and everyone gets squashed. Boom, crunch. A great musical. I can't say enough good things about Into the Woods. That's an S tier musical. Merrily We Roll Along. This is another really clever little show. It starts at the end of the characters' journeys, at the end of their lives, and then it goes backwards in time. So you see these really like horrible, broken people, and then you watch them slowly unbecome broken. Then it ends with this really uplifting, beautiful song, this really optimistic song, Our Time. It's our time, breathe it in. Worlds to change and worlds to win. Our turn coming through. And it kind of gives all the characters a second chance. It makes you feel like, oh, we're going to start the journey again this time, and maybe it won't turn out so bad. The show does the job of kind of taking our jaded, like, 20th, 21st century adult minds and slowly but surely, gently easing us back in time to the optimistic time when we were kids. You walk out of that theater feeling really, really optimistic and feeling like you don't have to go down the same path that these people went down. So Merrily, We Rolled Along, that's another A tier for me. Pacific Overtures, I don't know very well. I only know Someone in a Tree, but I don't know it well enough to rank it, I don't think, so I'm going to put that in the question mark block as well. Next we have Passion. Oh, I love Passion. People don't appreciate Passion enough. It's really, and I get why they don't appreciate it, it's really kind of dark and messy, and it's hard to commit your attention to. The music is so, like, atonal and, like, weird. But it's a really interesting examination of love and what love is. It reminds me a lot of Light in the Piazza, which is a musical by Adam Guettel, because they both talk about this, like, really obsessive, passionate kind of love that burns very brightly and flickers out. And in Passion, they do that through the lens of a woman with some sort of disease, and she falls in love with this handsome soldier who falls in love with her in return just through the power of how much she feels for him, which is kind of like obsessive and creepy, but there's something about the way it's written that makes it feel really sincere and really human, and we forgive the objectively, like, kind of creepy quality of the relationship and the pressure that she exerts on him. We kind of forgive that because of how authentically Sondheim tells the story through the music. So he allows us to see so much of our own humanity in that story. So Passion is also going to be definitely an A tier for me. Sunday in the Park with George. Oh man. This musical is about creating art. And it's about what it means to create art. And it's loosely based on the life of Georges Seurat. Georges Seurat famously painted A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, which is this painting here. You've all seen it before. And just like Into the Woods, he does a really clever thing with the Act 1, Act 2. And this is also partly the way that he plays with James Lapine, the person who wrote the librettos for Into the Woods and Sunday in the Park with George. So Act 1 of Sunday in the Park with George is about the fictional version of Georges Seurat. And then Act 2 is set like 100 years later, and it's about his great-grandchild who's kind of struggling with the exact same things that the painter George was struggling with as, like, this multimedia modern-day artist. And it's a really beautiful show about what it means to be an artist. Anyone I know who's any kind of artist, either they do, like, music or they do painting or something like that, anyone I know who's an artist relates to Sunday in the Park with George, and it's kind of huge in, like, the arts community. It kind of changed the arts world, I think, a little bit. So I'm going to put that in the S tier where it belongs. S for Sunday. Sweeney Todd, another one just like Gypsy. This deals with, like, people who are kind of really, they've got a screw loose. Sweeney Todd is the extreme example of that, with Mrs. Lovett and Sweeney who, like, kill people and bake them into pies. And it's really kind of dramatic and dark. The score. Like, that's so creepy. There's not a catchy tune in this whole show, unless you count Joanna. I feel you, Joanna. But even that is kind of like harmonically crunchy. And I mean, all of Sondheim's work is, but I think Sweeney Todd is especially. So Sweeney Todd doesn't get as much kind of widespread acclaim as it should. It's really clever, and it explores darkness in the human psyche in the way that, like, American Psycho does, but it's a musical, and that's kind of never been done, so that one's going right in the A tier. And then, of course, West Side Story. Sondheim only wrote the lyrics. This was his first ever Broadway show, and it's recently been made into a movie with Steven Spielberg, so that's awesome. Great score. Leonard Bernstein wrote the music. Lots of really clever lyrics in it, too, for someone who was like, Sondheim was like, what, 26 when he wrote this? He was born in 1930, and the show premiered in 1957 on Broadway, so he was really young. He was in his 20s. but he still managed to come up with some really, really heartbreaking lyrics and some really clever little bits of wordplay. So West Side Story is also going to be an A tier for me. And there you go. These are just, I mean, Sondheim wrote a lot in his career, so this is not all of his work, but it's a really good chunk of it, and this is kind of how I feel about them. So if there's anything that you are shocked and appalled at, like if anyone's really mad that I put Do I Hear a Waltz down in the B- tier, comment below and let me know what you think. Alright, let me know if you like this kind of video. This is so much fun for me just to do this. Maybe I'll do some more composers. Maybe I'll do like a Jason Robert Brown ranking tier list next time. Once again, my name is Mateo Chavez Lewis. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you next Saturday in the next video. Goodbye!